Good evening, everybody. Thanks for snowshoeing in tonight. Today, we're proud to present to you the first in a series of lectures in a special program with one of the top forensic scientists and criminal profilers in the world. And that's not hyperbole. Dr. Brent Turvey has authored a number of textbooks that are used in universities and law enforcement agencies around the world, including Criminal Profiling, An Introduction to Behavioral Evidence Analysis, 4th edition, Forensic Fraud, which was published in 2013, and Forensic Victimology, also published in 2013. He is also co-author of 5 other volumes: the Rape Investigation Handbook, 1st and 2nd editions, Crime Reconstruction, 1st and 2nd editions, Ethical Justice and Miscarriages of Justice, Anabolic Steroid Abuse in Public Safety, and Behavioral Evidence Analysis, International Practice and Protocols. Dr. Turvey is currently a full partner with forensic scientist, criminal profiler, and instructor with Forensic Solutions, LLC. He's also director of the Forensic Criminology Institute, which operates in the United States and Latin America. Since 1996, he has consulted with many agencies, attorneys, and police departments in the United States, Australia, Barbados, Canada, China, Colombia, Ecuador, South Korea, Singapore, Mexico, and Scotland. Did I miss any?
Probably.
On a range of cases as a forensic scientist and criminal profiler. He also has been court qualified as an expert in the areas of criminal profiling, forensic science, victimology, and crime reconstruction. Since 2012, Brent has served as a certifying instructor and forensic consultant to the Unidad de Investigación de la Defensa of the Policía Nacional, or DIJIN, the National Police Criminal Profiling Unit in Bogota, Colombia. And he continues to examine cases for law enforcement and attorneys in the United States, offering expert forensic testimony when necessary. His latest textbook, Forensic Investigations, published by Elsevier Science, is available next week on Amazon.com. His co-author is Dr. Stan Crowder, a retired colonel of the U.S. Army Office of the Inspector General and a professor of criminal justice at Kennesaw State University in Georgia. It addresses developments in the law enforcement and forensic science communities over the past 2 decades that have changed the way that physical evidence is understood and used in court. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Brent Turvey.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody, for showing up despite the snowstorm. We're broadcasting live on Facebook, and for all of our colleagues and friends in Latin America and warmer parts of the United States, it's hard to appreciate just how much snow we've gotten in the last, 2 hours? It's ridiculous. There was a nice layer there, but that's the way it goes. I need to do one thing here, and then it's all going to be good. Let me just share the video really quickly to one page, and then we'll be all set. That's me. And we're doing it. Share now with a page. I have to share it to my professional page so that everybody can see it, and then you'll have my undivided attention. Technology, but the amazing thing is having this technology work at all. This is just it's not even funny how difficult this was. All right, again, thank you for coming, and I am really so happy that over the last 17 years, I've actually made enough friends to fill a room in this place. That's really nice. It's really gratifying. So thank you. As Greg pointed out, I've published quite a few textbooks over the years, and I've put some of them in this library. Every time I get a new book that comes out, I try to donate one to the library. They are not child-friendly, and they are definitely used in colleges and universities all over the world. This is the latest endeavor. Now, what you're immediately thinking, if you're sort of halfway sentient and watch TV and watch films, what you're immediately thinking is that a book on forensic investigation, hasn't this subject already been covered to death? No pun intended. Right? Hasn't it already been covered by many people? Have many people written on this subject? Hasn't it been overdone and overdone? Aren't there people smarter than me, better looking than me, who have written textbooks on this subject? and much better textbooks, much more legible, much more informative? The answer is no, in terms of the newness of the subject. There are definitely better looking and smarter people out there than me, and definitely they've written books. But this is the first of its kind to address some of the issues we're going to cover. So let's, I think I'm having some, hold on here. Go, there we go. Okay. Okay, so, let's just look at this image. What is this? Somebody raise their hand and earn a chocolate. Tell me what I'm looking at. There you go, young lady. I knew you were going to be first. I could feel it. I can feel it. Tell me, what am I looking at?
Finger mark.
Kind of.
They keep calling it that on other TV shows.
Yes, what do you call it? It is a fingerprint, in fact.
It's a thumb.
Well, that could very well be. Possibly. Either one. Thumbprint, fingerprint, doesn't matter what you call it. It is the gold standard in forensic science for 100 years. This is, what do you think about, when we have a fingerprint, what does that mean? If they find a fingerprint on an item of evidence at the crime scene, what does that mean? Guilty. I like, that's very good. That's actually what people think. They think guilty. That's very good. We're going to come back to that. Very good. Thank you, man. Exactly. It helps with identification. Not just helps. What more? Give me the real answer. If a police officer is dusting for a print, they find a match between two prints, what do they say?
Case solved.
Case solved. It's over, right? We have now identified the owner of this fingerprint. We make a comparison. We make a match. This is a conclusive, authoritative match. Has been this way for 100 years, correct? No. No. Not only is that not true, it's never been true. All right? That's the problem, though. We have this idea that that's true. Because nowadays we have DNA, right? DNA. This is my friend and colleague John Butler. Works for the federal government in different capacities. And he's written several treatises on forensic DNA typing. And his books, I think, are among the best. And maybe that's, I'm a little biased, but he writes about the limitations and all that sort of thing. But when you think of DNA, what do you think? Proof. Right, dispositive proof. It's absolute, right? DNA cannot be questioned, right? That's the gold standard. The new gold standard, right? No. It's not. It's not at all. If I was having this conversation in front of a bunch of law enforcement analysts, there would be an uproar by this point. But unfortunately, I'm in Sitka with people who have to think for themselves. This is, I'm not joking about that. This concept, believing what other people tell you, believing what the media tells you, believing what experts like me tell you, instead of thinking for yourself, it's called outsourcing cognition. Letting others read, reason, and interpret the world for you. And because that's true, when people hear the words DNA or they hear the words fingerprint, they think, well, that's proof positive. That's guilty. That's somebody we know. The DNA matches, they're guilty. The fingerprints match, they're guilty. That's immediately what we think as lay people. And that is one of the most difficult things to unseat, even amongst people who should know better. So, hit the wrong button. There's like 3 buttons. I keep hitting the wrong one. Okay. Very quickly. So, the National Institute of Justice, the National Institute of Standards and Technology and the Department of Justice got together and they formed the President's Commission on Forensic Science. And in 2016, they published their findings. And those findings are related to all area of forensic science interpretation and identification. Specifically, let's just talk about fingerprints. These are the things you're not allowed to say about fingerprints ever on the stand because they're not scientifically valid. You're not, an examiner may not state or imply that 2 friction-rich prints originated from the same source to the absolute exclusion to others. It means you can't say it must be the same person who deposited the print. Can't ever say that. There could be other sources. You absolutely cannot ascribe a statistical or numerical value or certainty, like I'm 95% true or it's 100% true. You can't do that. There's no research to support that. And you're never allowed to say that you have a 0 error rate. I've never been wrong. You're not allowed to say that because the tests, the scientific tests that have been run on fingerprint examination show about a 25 to 30% error rate among examiners. It's not good. Why is that? There's a real reason why. It's very simple. Most latent print identification is done by older examiners in their 50 years or plus, haven't had their eyes checked, and they make mistakes all the time. I am about to be 47 this year. And I am just this year having to hold things this far away to see them because I need glasses. It's going to happen this year, I promise. You're going to see me over at the Nugget, you're going to see me wearing spectacles reading something because I'm that old. But I recognize that limitation. For those who do these examinations for the FBI, the retired guys, or who do them for the police crime labs, they're retired people and they're doing the identifications and they get stuff wrong all the time. All the time. They just don't keep track of it. So, right now, everything you thought that you knew about forensic science is over. Everything that you think you understand about evidence interpretation is over. And everything that you're reading in the headlines, you have to start questioning. Because the journalists don't even know. When I talk to journalists about this stuff, they have no idea. This is our government and our Department of Justice saying this. Now here's the real fun question. How many professionals who are doing fingerprint examinations and DNA analysis are putting these limitations into practice? 0. Nobody testifies to these limitations. Nobody says them out loud. In fact, a prosecutor will cherry pick the examiners they want to come testify to make sure it's one that will testify the way they like. Out of an entire lab, they'll ask, I want this guy or I want that guy. That's why there had to be a whole court ruling called Melendez-Diaz to prevent prosecutors from doing that. So the only person who does the analysis can come testify in court. And that's put a real stranglehold on the ability to do this kind of misleading testimony. All right. Oh, come on now. There. Yes, please.
So haven't they digitized the ability to...
Such a great look at so much. Look at this. Here's a chocolate. Wow. I know. 2 chocolates. Now I feel guilty for giving her 2 chocolates. But that's such a great question. On TV, film and television, we are over and over again taught that there are these international national databases of DNA and fingerprints that law enforcement parse or use in real time to identify suspects, correct? This is what we see. In fact, in your mind, you probably think that's how it works. Not even close. They have nothing like that. Not only is there no national database, even locally they don't get along too well. There are national databases, but not everybody submits to them. There are national databases that have particular standards that local labs don't use. And local labs don't communicate with other labs except for sometimes by email or fax still. They check them manually. That's how they do them. Like, for example, in the great state of Alaska, we have about 15 really important unsolved homicide cases with DNA. That DNA is sent off to the CODIS database in the FBI once a month via email. That's how they check. There is no nationwide database. It's not a real-time thing. It's not a real thing that exists. But the perception that it exists is very important for us to believe the efficacy of the agencies that are involved. They will allow you to believe that and not correct you. All right? They will allow you to believe that there's that kind of technology and there's not. For those of you who don't know me very quickly, I just want to go through who I am. I have multiple degrees in psychology and history. I have a master's of science in forensic science, and I have a PhD in criminology. And I've been doing this work for almost 20 years now. It's about 17 years, I think. 17, 18 years. Every time I answer the question, I realize how much older I've gotten. I'm just, oh, Jesus. All right, so I do multiple things. And because I work as an educator for different universities, traveling around giving lectures. I also publish a number of textbooks, which I said you can check out some of them for free at the library. I'll try to get them all. By the end of this year, I'm hoping to have them all here. That's my hope. And I also work criminal cases and civil cases for attorneys and law enforcement agencies all over the world. For example, last week I testified via phone for a case I worked on in the great state of Tennessee, in a child abuse case. If you want to type my name into Google, you'll see that I testified there. The judge declared that I was definitely an expert, but that I definitely couldn't testify because he didn't want me to criticize law enforcement, which is what I was going to do. So anyway, it was interesting. That's going to be a reversible error right there. So, one of the roles that I've taken on is that I've taken on this role as director of the Forensic Criminology Institute. Oh, I put these up there because some people don't think you're real unless you're on TV. I'm on TV a lot, and it's really the dumbest part of my job, but I will do it if it's instructive. I will do it if it's helpful. I will not do it if it's just gratuitous. So if you go on Netflix, you can watch, there's a show called How Sherlock Holmes Changed the World. I'm in about 20 minutes of that. It's about an hour and a half long. It's really interesting. It's a historical documentary. Also, this was on a case I worked. This right here is a screen grab from a case I worked for the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation involving the rape homicide of 2 young teenage girls. And so they interviewed me about that. Anyway, so that's what that is. I work all over the world. I work for, like I said, law enforcement agencies. I work for the media, but more importantly, I work for attorney clients. That's how I pay the majority of my bills. That and textbook publications. For example, I am the certifying instructor for the National Police in Bogota, in Colombia, as well as we're working on doing something with the Attorney General's office down there. I also do the same thing for Attorney General agencies all over Mexico and all over Latin America, including, like we said, Ecuador before. And one of my bigger clients in the past was the Attorney General's office for the country of Scotland. The only time I ever get called is if something's gone terribly, terribly wrong and there's a big pile of bodies. Or there's something so horrific they don't really know how to get their mind around it. So they need somebody who's an expert in violent crime, and violent, aberrant, usually with sexually motivated crime. And so they call me.
I have to ask you about Oz.
Oz, which about?
U.S., Canada, Oz, UK.
Oh, Australia. Oz.
Oz?
Yeah. I used to do a lot of work in Australia. In fact, that's where I received my PhD at Bond University in the Gold Coast of Australia. And if you know, that's what they call it. They call it Oz. And it's shorter, but I couldn't get them all in there. So I put Oz. I like that. Australia, working for the Aussies. I've worked for a number of different police agencies there. For the law enforcement, helped put away at least 2 different offenders, both of which held up to appeal, which is nice. This is a short list of the books that I've written. 2 of them I wrote by myself. Most of them I wrote with colleagues, co-authored or co-edited. Like Crime Reconstruction, I co-edited with John Savino of the Manhattan Spectral, with Jerry Chisholm of the California DOJ. Forensic, Rape Investigation Handbook, I co-wrote with Detective John Savino from NYPD Sex Crimes Unit. This was my PhD, which they asked me to turn into a textbook, which I did, on forensic fraud, studying people who lie, people like myself who go into court and lie, who fake evidence, who lie about having education they don't have, people who lie about having experience they don't have, people who lie about evidence they didn't examine. And if you just type in crime lab scandal, even in the last few years, you're going to find I examined 100 examiners committing 45 to 46,000 cases of fraud over 10 years, from 2000 to 2010. And then from 2011 until now, it's actually gotten worse, way worse. The examiners are way. We're going to talk about a couple of those cases, but I just want to give you a little bit of a background. Right. So why do I go down to Latin America so much? Why do my colleagues in Latin America care so much about what it is that I have to say? How could this possibly have happened? Well, as you may or may not know, does anyone here know Lance Ewers or no? Lieutenant Ewers from the police department? He's a good guy, right? He's a good guy. I like Lance. We've had a lot of different people in from the PD over the years, and some I've liked and some I've not liked. I like Lance a lot. Well, Lance is off this week getting FBI training back east in D.C. And if you go on my Facebook page, you'll see that he posted he posted a photograph of the training material, which includes my textbook. That's what they train people with back there. So my textbooks are used by the FBI to train their people. But more importantly, my textbook was used to help develop the United Nations protocols for femicide investigation in Latin America. Femicide is any crime committed motivated by the gender of the woman, or the gender of the victim. All the protocols were developed based on the protocols I laid out in my textbook with my colleagues. And since they used my work to develop those protocols, if you want to be considered an expert in Latin America on the subject of femicide, which is huge, you have to study under someone who helped write them or helped develop them. And that would be me. So they keep having me come down to educate the court, to educate universities, to educate analysts. And their court just went from an inquisitorial system where you're presumed guilty to an adversarial system where you now get to be presumed innocent and defend yourself, where you actually have trials and things are public. In the past, trials were not public. The media was not allowed. But this year, 2016, that all changed. And anyway, that's why I keep going down there so much. So we translated a number of my textbooks into Spanish. And I have colleagues down there who are helping distribute them and sell them, and they're doing very well. And it's been probably one of the greatest experiences of my career to go down there and work with people who actually need help. So.
¿Hablas español?
Poquito. I know enough to know when I'm in trouble. That's what I say. I know enough to know when I'm in real danger, which is pretty much all the time. No. Depends on where you go. So anybody who listens to me talk, you got to hear about the scientific method just a little bit, because I need you to know who I am in the process. I'm not a police investigator. I'm not a crime scene technician. I am a forensic scientist. What does that mean? It means I examine evidence using the scientific method. The scientific method, what is that? This is my mentor, John Thornton. He took over the Berkeley Crime Lab in 1970. UC Berkeley's Crime Lab and Forensic Science program in 1970. And I started working cases with him in 97, 98. We were talking one time and he said, most forensic scientists would have a great deal of enthusiasm for scientific method if only they knew exactly what it was. Because most people don't know what it is. If you want to trip up someone who calls himself a scientist, ask them what the scientific method is and ask them to explain how they used it in their work. They will not be able to tell you. Because most people who work with evidence are actually not scientists. They are technicians or they are law enforcement brought in to do an examination that they're not really trained to do, but they're not really educated to do, but they've had training to do. Can anyone tell me what the difference between education and training is? This is a fun one. Yes. Education and training. What's the difference?
It's kind of like when your daughter comes home after school, you ask her what she's been doing, and she says she's had English and math and sex education, as opposed to when she comes home next year and you ask her what she's been doing, and she says, I've had English and math and sex training.
Sex training.
Is that it?
No. No, but I like your answer, so I'm going to give you a shot at it anyway. I will help you. So, education is that foundational, professional course of study that helps you have a baseline understanding of your area of study. Baseline understanding, and it prepares you with the baseline information that you need to launch yourself into a field of study. Training is the continual updates that you get in particular methods and techniques. Like if a new methodology comes along and a new technique comes along, then that's what training is. Okay? So training, we would have a weekend seminar. Education is you took a year to get a postgraduate certificate. Okay? That's the difference. One is foundational concepts and requires, demonstrating that you can write and read and with assessments. And the other one is, here's how to use this technique in this context. And then it'll take you 8 hours to learn it. All right? Most forensic scientists are technicians, not actual scientists. So, very quickly, get through some of this fun stuff. If you want to know what the scientific method is, there's 2 programs to watch. I recommend it's House and Mythbusters. Because all you're doing is you're trying to develop theories and then disprove them. Most people think the scientific method means that they have to learn how to try to prove a theory with the information they get. That's not what the scientific method is at all. That's the exact opposite of the scientific method. No scientist sets out to prove a theory. Because you can. If you just suppress information, cherry-pick resources, references, data, you can prove anything. And that's the problem. A scientist doesn't do that. A scientist develops a theory or multiple theories and then attacks it with a gauntlet of facts and tests and assessments. And the ones that survive that brutal attack, those are the ones that can move forward. Okay? So your mindset isn't ever to develop a theory that you want to go out and prove so you can be right and be loud. That's never what you're doing. You're always trying to beat up every theory you can to see the ones that survive and make it to the next level. Those are the ones you can move forward with. All right? Always tempting to disprove or falsify your theories. Be thinking about that. That's the cornerstone of the scientific method. Developing theories that you're going to try to disprove. All right? And this is the most important one. The value of an interpretation is judged on how well it accounts for the facts. If it's contradicted by the facts, it must be abandoned immediately. That means you can't be precious with your theories. You're not developing theories so you can look smart. You're developing theories so you can get smarter. So you can have real information, reliable information, accurate information. Right? And this is a concept that comes from historians, which I love. So, yeah. We're going to get to the meat. It's going to be so much more fun. So, the limits of evidence interpretation. We've talked about this. We started out by talking about fingerprints and DNA. The first time that I ever took a class on fingerprinting was I was an undergraduate. I was taught by a guy named Mike Bandon. He was a nice guy, good guy from the ID unit, Portland Police Bureau in Oregon. And he explained, you look at your fingerprints, you do a comparison side by side, you count points, you get to a certain number, you just stop, it's a match. That didn't even sound right to me when he said it. And I could tell when he was saying it, he knew it didn't sound right. But that was the accepted methodology at the time. The first question a scientist would ask is, how many points and how do you know when to stop? Because in forensic science, you're also taught the one dissimilarity doctrine. You're not looking for multiple points of agreement. If you just find one point of dissimilarity, you're done. You don't have to look for what matches, you look for what doesn't match. Right? That's the one dissimilarity doctrine. The point is, I recognized right away there was a problem with that. And I've been asking questions about it ever since, much to the chagrin of just about every police officer I've ever met. And eventually, you get to the scientists who are studying this, and they say you can't use point counting. That's not how it works. That's not how science works. There's no empirical data to support the assertion that it works. You can have as many as 16 points of agreement and still have two people have get a match on two different individuals. And that's happened. That's a problem. Same thing is true with DNA. DNA, the limitations on DNA are what? The statistics. How are the statistics and the probabilities generated? They were generated by studies done in 1999 and 2000 by the FBI, and they don't share their data and they won't share how they came to their findings. They just publish them without the data, which is completely inappropriate. What's more is inappropriate was what happened in Oz in Australia. In Australia, they didn't have a DNA database with probabilities and statistics to draw to, so they just used ours. The population, DNA stats are based on the population numbers from the DNA samples you got for your region. And they vary from area to area. So using one from a different state is a problem enough, but using a DNA database from a different country is completely impermissible. And they've got on the stand and they were lying about it, pretending they had their own database. They didn't. So in about 2003, 2004, they had to fess up and stop saying that that's what they were doing. So for a period of time between about 2003 and 2007, you weren't seeing any forensic scientists from Australia testifying to DNA. They do everything they could to get out of it. So this information that I'm giving you, it's been known for a long time. I published it in 2005 with Jerry Chisholm, and then we published it again after the NAS report in 2009. This is how you identify a scientist, though, because this is one of the most important things for a layperson to understand. The way you identify a scientist, they are always telling you their limitations. It'll be a product of their reports. In the report, they'll say what the limitations are. If it's published research, that'll be a limitation. They'll make it very clear in the limitation section. And even with you and I, when I'm talking to you, I will be talking to you about the limitations of what I know, what my experience is, what my references are. You will know. You'll have them. That's how you know. As someone who's not a scientist speaks in terms of certainty, speaks in terms of absolute certainty, speaks in terms of their experience. He speaks in terms of never really being wrong. And that's a problem. So, as I just mentioned, the NAS report came out in 2009. It's free. It's online. You can go find it. It was the National Academy of Sciences, a congressionally funded group. Their job is to do reports on different areas of scientific interest to the nation and educate Congress as to how to form the budget. So their job is to teach our politicians how to spend their money, spend our money, and what's valid and what's not. They came out with two major findings in 2009. One, the law enforcement mission and the forensic science mission are so different that by putting them together and forcing them together, it actually creates a huge amount of bias and improper relationships and collusion and erodes the trustworthiness of the findings. So they have to be separated for it to be trustworthy. The second thing is they found there's no empirical research to support the majority of the forensic sciences. The only one that's even enjoyed any real research has been, to a limited extent, firearms and tool marks, but not very much. And then the other one's DNA. The rest of them, nobody studies them at all. Why is that? Can anyone guess why there has been no research in these areas? I already hinted at it a little bit. Why?
Too many variables.
No, that's a really great answer. I like that answer. It makes you look smart, makes me look smart, makes us look smart to the world. Too many variables would be a problem. But that's not it. What is it really? It's worse than that. It's so basic, it's not even funny.
It disproves too many.
I like where you're going.
What police want.
Well, that's exactly.
It's wrong, so they don't want it.
I love that.
What you understand.
Exactly. So first of all, there's a disincentive for this kind of research because it would actually show the limitations of the evidence, right? That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
I hope. Exactly. So there's no incentive on the part of the people who use forensic science to do research that might actually be critical of it. That's the first thing. But there's a more fundamental problem. The people who can do the research are scientists. Those people don't work for law enforcement. Law enforcement controls forensic science. Those people who work in law enforcement are not necessarily trained and educated as scientists. Law enforcement is a group of technicians or people who barely have a high school education. That's who's doing the majority of forensic sciences. That's why the American Academy of Forensic Sciences cannot require that people have a bachelor's degree in the area of science or scientific inquiry, because if they did, they'd lose 50% of their members, because most of them don't have a college education. All right? Forensic science is in the hands of high school graduates, not scientists. That's the problem. So they not only do they have a great disincentive not to do it, they wouldn't know how to do it even if they did. And when they do it, when they attempt at it, they make terrible mistakes, like no baseline, like too small sample size. I mean, I could go on and on about that subject, but that's the main reason. And if anyone disagrees with me, by the way, I'm telling you stuff that's based on what I have found in my research. If anyone disagrees with me or has a question, I want to hear about it, because I won't be upset about it at all. This is stuff that I love talking about, because I know forensic scientists who are PhD level, who work for the state, and they are stifled and stymied like you would not believe. It's not even funny. So I know some of what I'm saying is true. I know there are examples that disprove what I'm saying to an extent, but the fact that the research hasn't been done is to your suggestion, but also because the people who can do it, the vast majority of them do not have the proper education to do it, apart from not having the incentive. So there's a very important harmony of two things competing with each other. All right. So, yes, please.
So is it usually the law enforcement are the ones who gather the evidence? And
Very
then you
good.
guys are the ones that analyze it and present it?
Great question. You've had too many chocolates. You're obviously all ginned up on sugar. The answer is the law enforcement is the only one who has statutory authority to collect, to seize a crime scene, to collect and process evidence and collect it and send it off. The technicians, depending on what state you're in, the technicians work for the police office. And very often it winds up being, the technicians are actually people who are, it's the rubber gun squad for a lot of the agencies out there. If you lost your gun because you got into domestic violence, or you lost your gun because you're taking psychotropic medications, they put you in either in the crime scene unit or they put you in the jail, because you don't have to carry a gun for those things. So, very often those people are, and if you look up the jobs, man, they pay those people so little. It's like minimum wage for somebody in Florida. It's terrible. They're people that are not on a salary. A lot of times they're civilian employees. It's very few states, and California is one of them, where they have people from the crime lab respond to process the evidence from crime scenes. But it is law enforcement who controls everything. But it's worse than that. Law enforcement are the ones who decide what gets tested, because it's the detective who decides whether or not a piece of evidence gets tested, not the crime lab. So that's why a lot of places they fight over having DOJ come out to the crime scene. I've watched detectives lay into criminalists for collecting things. Now I got to test that. Now the defense is going to see that, and just leave it. That fighting happens at crime scenes. It's not even funny. Yeah.
Can you kind of address, well, obviously the defense,
Yeah.
if they have enough money?
Yeah.
Aren't they going to say, well, you chose not to pick that up?
Well, I will.
I mean,
Yeah.
so is it just about money that
No.
the criminals can't afford to say, well, hey, you're not even educated, none of your evidence is legitimate?
Well,
These are courts of law.
this would be great. Courts of law and courts of science are two different things. So let's address this a little bit. It's a great question. Money will not guarantee that you have the best. That's a fallacy of economy. In Scotch, if you pay a lot of money, you're probably going to get a really, really good Scotch. That's about it. You can pay. I had a client a couple years ago. They paid $3 million to a defense attorney firm. They took that money, they banked it, they didn't do anything, no investigation, didn't hire any experts, kept all the money for themselves. The client lost their house, they lost all their property, and they went to jail. And my colleague and I took their case on pro bono and helped them get out eventually. But that's why in California so many high-paid attorneys are also real estate agents. So they can sell and keep the commission of the house that they get from their clients.
You're lucky.
So you're lucky in what
And
way?
you hire someone
Who's good.
is actually going to investigate.
Yes.
I mean,
If I were in the state of California and I was charged with a capital murder, I want the public defender to do it. Public defenders have the best system set up like you wouldn't believe. They talk to each other. They have seminars. They're well funded most of the time. They have the most experienced attorneys. They have a network of investigators. They have access to databases. They know what they're doing usually. Now let's look at a state like Texas that defunded the public defender system. It's all appointed counsel. Let's look at Louisiana, all appointed counsel. Arkansas, Mississippi, all appointed counsel, which means it's not a public defender. It's not somebody who does it on a regular basis. Not somebody who has the experience.
Not somebody who wants to do it.
Not somebody who even wants, exactly. My wife can tell you, I just was on the phone with a client not too long ago. And it's like pulling teeth to get some of these people to actually do their investigation, to actually do their examination. And I wound up, one night, I was on the phone for like 2 hours. I had to put it down and I had to go and just have 2 hits of bourbon because I was so mad. Because it's just like, I'm trying to explain to you how to do your job. I'm trying to explain to you what the law says. And I shouldn't be explaining that to you because I'm not a lawyer. And that's the important thing. I'm not a lawyer. My job is to educate lawyers. And it's not a matter of money. The money will not make a difference in the world. It has to be somebody it's like saying, can you pay somebody enough to tell the truth? This is a fundamental character issue. Either you're a professional and you love your job and you do it well all the time, whether you get paid or not, or you don't. You can't pay someone to be professional. You can't pay them to be honest. It's not how it works. Not in my experience, anyway. If someone else has a different opinion, please, I'd love to hear it. But from my experience, the more money does not mean more quality. So it's not about that. It's not about making sure that enough money gets to the right attorney. In fact, what I found is the more you're paying, the more likely you're getting somebody who's taking a nice big paycheck from you. You're more likely you're going to lose your house. And you're going to be in jail while they're selling your house.
Well, can you, as an accused, hire an investigator, not
Yes.
through the attorney?
All the
You know, like in real estate now, where you hire someone, not the realtor, now you have this other.
I have participated in those cases where I have even recently, where you have an attorney who does not want to hire an expert or an investigator because they want to keep all the money for themselves. And the defendant says, no, we're going to have this looked at by somebody. I'm going to hire them separately. Because what happens invariably is there's a fight between the defendant and their family who believes in the innocence of the client and the attorney who may or may not believe that, but certainly wants to keep the money for themselves. Now, there are very good attorneys who do not think that way. Many of them do not think that way, but many of them do. I will tell you right now, if I was charged with a capital murder, there'd be I give you a list of 5 names in the world that I would use to represent me. No, actually 2. Come to think of it, 1 or 2 of them are dead. So 2 right now. And it has nothing to do with money. I can think of Gretchen Mosley, who I hope is watching this. I trust you. She works for the Oklahoma Indigent Defense System in Oklahoma. She's a public defender, and she is not a millionaire. And she is extremely knowledgeable of the law and argues extremely well for her clients. I also would pick Rob Carey, who works for Williams & Connolly, probably one of the highest paid law firms in the country, and for good reason. But it's not the money. And there are very few attorneys who are that good. So, but this is I love this
Can
line
I
of
ask
question.
a question?
Please.
How does the probability considerations work into your field?
You are not ever allowed to talk about probabilities or statistics unless you have a math degree or unless you've had them calculated in some research study by somebody else and you can present that study to show that you relied upon it. This is the reason why so many DNA labs have been shut down in the last 10 years. Why? Because those analysts who work for the state go into court without any training. They've been trained. Here's where usually their training comes from. Their training comes from the guy who sold them the DNA machine. They don't have any math background. They don't have any stats background. So what do? They get on the stand and start spouting statistics. Where do those statistics come from? Those 2 FBI studies I told you about. All right? What I always have my clients do is I say, if you've got a DNA analyst on the stand, they're saying the probability is 1 in a billion, or the probability is 1 in 20 million. Great. That's so good. That's so nice to have that. Here's a pen. Right? Go up to the analyst on the stand and say, here you go. Here you go, Dr. So-and-so. Please show us how you made that calculation. Please show us how you came to that number. Just we'll wait. That's how probability. Because I'll tell you right now, I've not met one criminalist who's a DNA criminalist who could do it. Which means they're all relying upon numbers that other people made up for them. And I'll tell you about the consequence of that at the end of this lecture. But it's a great question. It figures in because we should know it, we need to know it, and unless we have the actual numbers to work with, we shouldn't be talking about certainty or probabilities. The word, in fact, probability gets used by scientists all the time who don't know what it means. A probability refers to an actual number. There is a mathematical probability. Yeah,
Okay, wait a minute.
Yeah, please.
If you take a course, for example, in genetics,
Yes.
the old classical genetics,
Yes.
okay, one of the experimental procedures that you follow is to use, for example, the quadratic equation.
Of course.
To find it.
Exactly.
Anybody that's taken,
A little Punnett square is what you're talking about. Boom, boom, right there. Yeah.
anybody that's taken second year algebra has had that background.
Didn't do so well in algebra myself, but go on.
You're,
You're right.
Okay.
You're absolutely
The
right.
same way with DNA.
Yes.
It's based on the probabilities that these things are going to happen. And it can be mathematical analysis to do it. And
Right.
statistical probability problems aren't really that difficult. I mean,
They're not. If you understand numbers and math, they're not. But to everyone else who's not taking that class or didn't pay attention in that class, numbers frighten them. How many people in this room right now are they're thinking, because I'm doing it, I'm thinking numbers scare me, numbers scare me. I know the numbers that I know, and I know how to calculate the numbers that I know, but man, if I step even just 1 inch to the left, I'm screwed because I know how complicated it is. That's everybody in a jury box, that's every lawyer that's you've ever met, that's every judge you've ever met. They are relying upon people like me, scientists, to tell them what they think the numbers are because they don't want to have to calculate themselves. What are they doing? They're outsourcing their cognition, right, to the expert. That's the first problem. How it should play is, we should be able to, if you're going to talk about probabilities and statistics, you should be able to explain where those numbers come from. You should be able to do those calculations yourself, or else you shouldn't be allowed to testify to them. And that's such a great discussion, and we'll get to it at the end because you're going to see the consequence of that in a second.
I'm going to ask you one more question.
Oh, please, I want to hear it. I do.
Do you know what Bayesian?
Bayesian logic. It's like fuzzy logic, basically. Heuristics.
No, it's you're testing hypotheses with it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's a whole book. A new book just came out last year called Application of Bayesian Logic Techniques in Forensic Sciences. There's a old school of thought dedicated to this. It's never going to make it into court. Because Bayesian logic is subjective. It has subjective elements to it. It's not crisp logic that uses crisp and firm numbers every time. It uses, correct me if I'm wrong, contrived algorithms or no?
You set up several situations, and then you go out and collect the data.
Right.
And then whatever the data fits, that's the one used. This is what Fish and Game uses.
Exactly. Do you know why that can never work in court? Let me tell you why that will never be admissible in court. It's very simple.
Nobody understands.
That's the real reason. Let's talk about the reason that the judge would use to exclude it. A judge will exclude that because it's not based on a real life scenario. It's based on a test that you can contrive. This is the great irony of forensic science. If you construct a test to try to figure out why something happened, that will not be admissible because it does not replicate real life conditions. But if you just guess at it based on your experience, judges will let that right in.
Because you're an expert?
Well, or you're a police officer. That's normally who they... Exactly. Being a police officer is not the same thing as being an expert. And I was having this conversation with my attorney client last week, and I just wanted to throw my phone through a wall. Because there's a presumptive, when a law enforcement officer testifies, they're a fact witness, not an expert, unless they get qualified as an expert. There's a process you have to go through to qualify them as an expert. The problem is, people suspend that, and they suspend those rules when a police officer testifies, and defense attorneys don't object, and things get in that shouldn't, and it creates a big fat mess. This is Judge Alex Kozinski. He was instrumental in preparing the National Academy of Sciences report, and he talks about the same thing. Basically, that when law enforcement's involved, there's a lot of bias. There's also there's a tendency to report things with greater certainty. You'll see a report that says one thing that's very conservative and helpful. Then you'll get them on the stand, and all of a sudden it's like absolutely certain. Well, that's not what you said in your report. You said maybe. Now you're saying absolutely. You said, well, yeah. I should have said that probably in my report, or maybe I've learned some more things, but it's absolutely certain. There's a hardening that happens when people testify for the prosecution and they have the certainty of judicial coverage. If a finding tends to eradicate or erode law enforcement opinion, then it gets minimized. I had a case where I worked where a young child was in a room with a mother, and the mother heard somebody come in and kill her husband, who was a police officer, and the person left. An FBI profiler came along and said, I can tell this crime scene was staged. The mother did it. Well, how can you tell it was staged? He said very simply, the child's room is ransacked. In a case of staging, a criminal coming in would never ransack a child's room because the child's room has nothing of value in it. There's nothing to look for in there. So of course this was staging. Is this the key feature of your finding? Yes, it is. And what happens? We find out that so we ask him, would you change your opinion if you found out something else happened? He said, of course I would. I would change my opinion in a heartbeat. Well, turns out that a police officer ransacked that room looking for clothing for the child. The room was pristine when the police officer went in. We were confronted with this new piece of information. The profiler refused to change their opinion. Why? Because they didn't want to look stupid. There's a big case where that just happened just this week. The case just got overturned because the same profiler, because that same kind of refusal to change testimony when new facts arise. And I just spent an hour yesterday on the phone with the LA Times about it, so that article will be coming up probably Monday. Yes?
You say minimize, is that by a judge, a jury, or the press? Or are you saying just general?
First, it has to be minimized by the people who collected and testified. So if it's minimized, like for example, if you collect a piece of evidence and you test it, I'll give you an example. The case I talked about in Oklahoma. This is a case involving the rape homicide of two young girls. One's 11, one's 13. DNA, they were both found shot to death with two different guns on the side of a road in Oklahoma. DNA was found in their underwear. Sperm DNA. Okay, sounds really important, right? I get involved in the case. They start developing suspect lists. They start testing the DNA. They test over 100 suspects before they find somebody else who confesses to a crime that's very similar. And since they like him, they dump me as their expert, stop returning my calls, and then they hire the FBI. The FBI comes and writes a new report that doesn't even mention the semen or the sperm. They bring this guy into trial, and they prosecute him, and basically what they say is it's not, the DNAs are unrelated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the DNA is not related to this case. The sperm is not relevant to this crime. Really, 11-year-old girl and a 13-year-old girl have sperm in their underwear, both of them from the same guy. It doesn't match your guy, and it's not important. Interesting. As we sit here today, right now, they still don't know whose DNA that is, and they convicted some other guy of the crime. How is that possible? Because they minimized the evidence through a pattern of testimony and a pattern of behavior on part of law enforcement and the prosecutors during the trial. They, under color of authority, acted like it didn't matter. And because the jury outsourced their logic and their cognition to this group of people, well, they must know something we don't. No, they don't. They're not allowed to know stuff you don't know. They're not allowed to do that. They're supposed to tell you what they have. They're supposed to put all the cards on the table. So minimize can mean lots of different things, but that's a good example of it.
Well, I think like us, average people that sit and watch these forensic shows and things, I think that's a lot of what happens is that then when they advertise it without a full story out about it, it's like almost like smoke screens. So it's like they lead you to believe that, when this person was found guilty of this crime that was so similar, I mean, it has to be actually confessed to this crime, this links to this, and then boom, they put all those pieces there to make you go, oh yeah, and then you'll forget about the DNA. So I feel like there's a lot of that.
It's de-emphasized. You say cloak or smoke screen, but what they're really doing is they're using the shotgun approach to make, like you said, make you forget about it. Yeah. The order of the witnesses, the order of the evidence, all these things are contrived to make you believe a version of events that's being sold to you. And it may be correct, or it may not be correct. And that's where critical thinking comes in, like we talked about. All right, so that's Kaczynski wrote an excellent paper on it.
Before you leave that.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said something about, in the last one, about prosecution theories.
Yes.
Okay, well, the prosecution theories aren't really theories, they're hypotheses at that point.
That's right. This is the real problem. It's a logical problem, like you're suggesting. One of the things you have to learn to do as a citizen, as a forensic scientist, as a human being on this planet, is you have to learn to distinguish between opinions, theories, hypotheses, and conclusions. And the real problem is you get somebody who's got a really great theory, and they present it inappropriately as a conclusion. And then it turns into an assumption that's made and never checked against the evidence. That's what you're talking, and that's a real problem. They're actually most of these things are just hypotheses that have not been tested. And we're going to talk about why that's important in a second.
Well, how does inductive reasoning follow through on this?
Well, inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning are two very separate things, as we know. Induction means that you're taking essentially what's referred to as nomothetic or group data, and you're generalizing that to a particular conclusion. I believe in deductive logic, where you examine individual, like a physician. You don't examine everybody to figure out what's wrong with Kim. You examine Kim. Induction means you're examining the situation of the case. You're examining what's in front of you with the case. You don't look at all the other similar, or potentially similar things. You look at what's in front of you. Again, the way it works is I think inductive logic should be used to generate theories. That's what it should be used. And then you disprove those theories over time, and the fact that you're able to disprove things leaves you with some potential conclusions of various reliability. Hopefully, they've had a basic course on logic. Hopefully, they've had a basic course in philosophy and didn't fall asleep like I did. When I had nothing to apply these things to in college, I hated them. But once you have real-life problems, they become vastly important, in my opinion. But let me give you an example. The FBI crime lab. Everybody hears FBI, they think, oh my God, the greatest agency in the world, most competent, highly skilled. Not even remotely true. This is the FBI's. I was in a car with Rob Carey, my client, the attorney, and he got tapped to examine the hair and fiber problems that they were having with the FBI back in 2012, 2011. Essentially, they came out that they had been falsifying the certainty of their testimony in hair and fiber analysis for years. They were presenting inductive theories as deductive conclusions with respect to hair and fiber. They were saying hair and fiber matches, therefore it's a solid lock, just like fingerprints, blah, blah, blah. Not even remotely true. That's always been class evidence. It's always been limited in its reliability. I won't bore you with it, but the upshot is this. Right now, right as we stand here, about 21,000 cases are being called into question. Hundreds have already been dismissed. Hundreds. Each one of those cases representing potentially millions of dollars. Falsely prosecuted based on terrible evidence. And it wasn't, they had 29 hair and fiber people. How many people were giving false testimony in court about this? Knowingly? 26. So almost all of them were in court testifying falsely, and they knew they were doing it. I can't tell you the number of times that FBI agents have actually broken down on the stand and had to admit they didn't know what they were talking about, or they were testifying in a way that they were instructed. Okay? Because most of these people are actually lawyers or accountants and not forensic scientists at all. And they wind up working in the crime lab for whatever reason, or testifying on behalf of the crime lab for whatever reason. Go ahead.
So you talked a little bit, too, about like the difference between education and training, thinking about the people that first arrive on the scene.
Those are the technicians, that's correct. Or there's actually the police officers, they secure it, then they call the crime scene unit, which is populated by technicians. And usually those are people with a high school education.
And I can't help but wonder that, of how many cases that there may be where that initial situation happens, the area is secured, they start collecting evidence, and how often is it that it's contaminated, collected improperly, whatever, that by the time it gets to where it's getting analyzed.
What you're talking about, you're talking about, and I'll give you a chalk up for that one because it plays right into my hand, which I love. You're talking about what's referred to as evidence dynamics. First of all, let me just suggest to you this. Can you catch it? Let me suggest to you that the evidence is always going to be contaminated to an extent at the crime scene because of human error. That's okay. As long as you recognize the document, it's okay. As long as you know that it happened. It's when you don't know that it happened or won't accept that it happened, that's when it's a problem. That's the purpose of having a chain of custody. But what you're talking about is people who are not educated to the point where they actually even know what's going on. They don't know that it's a problem. I'll give you an example. I worked a sexual assault case of a young lady who was raped in a closet by a UPS guy. In a closet no bigger than this small area right here. Okay? The police came, they collected everything out of the closet. She said, oh, she ejaculated on the ground, there's semen there, it's all good. Can you collect all that? So they collected her clothes, they collected all the clothing from the closet, they collected her shoes and the rape kit. They put it all in one bag and labeled it. Evidence item 1. That is not uncommon. That is so common it's not even funny. I can't even begin to tell you. All right? If that didn't happen on a regular basis, I would not have a job. Because you have people who are collecting evidence who have no idea how to collect evidence or why they're collecting the evidence. All right?
Their training is not lacking.
Or their training is non-existent. Yeah. I mean, it's not even a matter of lacking. Or worse, they've gone to training, but they just ignored it because they think they know better. Or worse, they've gone to training, they know what they're supposed to do, and they don't do it. Why? It's 5:30. I get off at 6. Just had 2 Detroit PD officers who just got charged with false reporting because they had an automobile accident half hour before their shift ended, a DUI. That's a felony, right? What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to call people, they're supposed to do stuff, they're supposed to collect evidence. They wrote in their report that the guy ran away, they couldn't identify him. They took the actual guy to his home and told him to sleep it off and call it in the next day. Why? Because they didn't want to stay and do the paperwork. They had stuff they had to do. They're being prosecuted right now for false reporting, felony false reporting. That's Detroit. That's not remote. That's today. That's like yesterday's paper. Okay? It's not just... I'm going to share something with you. This is very important. It's okay to make mistakes. I'm going to make 10 mistakes in the next hour. It's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to fail to admit them. That's the problem, okay? So, 21,000 cases right now, hundreds of millions of dollars, millions. And then once these cases get overturned, or all of them, each one of them represents millions of dollars in settlements. That's just hair and fiber. That's just one area of forensic science, okay? We're almost done. We're going to get there. Right, you guys are asking such great questions. I feel one of the things that happened when I moved up here to Alaska is I forgot. I thought that I was a smart person. I thought I was one of the smartest people. And then I thought, I'm moving to Alaska, it's about in the middle of nowhere, they don't have this, they don't have that, I'm going to be a smarter person. I know that I'm not. Because I know that the people who are here actually, they're very well read, they're good critical thinkers, and they often help me understand things better than I can understand myself. So thank you for reaffirming my belief in living in a community of people who actually think for themselves. Let's talk about forensic investigation and the political side of it. There's a very short period of time left on this, but I wanted to, this is why we wrote the book. Because forensic investigation is about documenting and revealing facts that establish truths, both inconsistent and horrific. Forensic investigators, however, tend to work for elected or appointed officials. They either work for, either they themselves are a police chief and they work for a politician, or they themselves work for the chief of police, or they work for somebody who works for DOJ, somebody who's appointed. So an appointed person is at will. They could be removed by the politician who pulls their strings. This means that they are continuously and repeatedly susceptible to pressure to conform to the political landscape. And that landscape may be adverse to revealing unblemished evidence that's in their custody. I'll give you a very specific, interesting example. I worked in Juarez from 2012 to 2014, a lot of work, even up to 2015. While I was there, I was working with the crime scene unit for the Attorney General's office in Juarez, in Chihuahua. And they had found the bodies of about 45 people out in the middle of the desert. Some of them were DEA, some of them were immigrants, some of them were others. They didn't want to tell anybody because they didn't want to hit the papers. So slowly, over a period of 3 or 4 years, they were just releasing to the media that they found a body here, a body there. What they weren't telling people was all part of a mass grave. Okay? That's an example. You think, oh, that's Mexico. No, we do that all the time. All the time. So let's not pretend. Okay? But that's an example of how you shape the truth. You're not lying, you're just not telling the whole truth, but that's still a form of a lie.
We can't just build a wall and say
It doesn't quite work that way. But let me give you a better example. What is it? My good friend Aurelio, who's a Mexican, he says, he's a forensic psychologist, he says, you know, it's okay you guys build a wall, we'll get over it. We'll get over it. Did you see my wife constantly is sending me pictures of the catapults that the cartels weld to the walls to launch things over it? So helpful. It's so helpful. Please build more walls. All right, so this is the crime scene unit. That's Richie Holman. That's the crime scene unit. A guy I gave training to, crime scene unit in Juarez. That's one of the nicer photos I can put up there. The rest of them are all like worse. So trying to keep it PG for the kiddies that might be out there. These guys at the crime scene unit, they have their own education, training, expertise, and their own politics. They might work for guys like this. This is Ralph Godby. Ralph Godby was the chief of police for the great city of Detroit. He's also a Baptist minister. Sounds like a great guy, right? Well, yes and no, depends on your opinion, but basically he had a litany of affairs with different women, and one of the women threatened to kill herself on Twitter by putting her service gun in her mouth and taking a picture of it because he was banging some other girl at a conference in San Diego, so he called back and had her put on a mental health hold. And she wound up getting out and suing the department for about $500,000. That's one example of what his life looks like. Do you want to think that a guy like this can do good work under a guy like that? If that's the culture that you're living in, that you're working in, what's going on in your head? What are you trying to do, and what are you trying to protect? All right? When you work for people who are political and who don't have a good moral character, it's a problem. It's always a problem. So, I just want you to think about that context. If you're somebody who's got that job and your job is science and truth and evidence, and you work for the people who aren't like that, what does that do to you? That's the first part. All right, so let's give an example. This one's for Kim. I was thinking about when I put this one in there. This is the Washington, D.C. Department of Forensic Sciences Crime Lab, brand new in 2012, $220 million spent in making this the state-of-the-art lab. All the bells and whistles, all the best machine, all the best chemicals, all the best everything. Internet, Wi-Fi, equipment for examining evidence, the brand newest machines for doing DNA, for doing, you just have it all. You've got plenty of ways to clean your surfaces before you go between cases. No problems whatsoever with supplies and technology. The people that they hired, on the other hand, were not properly trained scientists whatsoever. They had no background in mathematics. They had no idea how to interpret DNA results. So when they went on the stand, they were constantly getting embarrassed, flummoxed, and humiliated. So what happened? The U.S. attorney stopped using them and basically wrote a memo saying, I'm going to stop using you guys because I don't like them. I don't like what they're saying. I don't like that they don't understand the evidence. They're all incompetent. So I'm just going to start using my girlfriend's crime lab because she's got good people at her place. And Max Hauk, who I don't know him, but I know of him, and he publishes with the same company I publish. He's a retired FBI guy, and he does this very politician thing. He comes out and says, it's no problem. Everything's no problem. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Within a week, he was fired for negligence and incompetence. This was 2015. Now, a bunch of people in the forensic science community cry foul. The forensic science community is divided over this. Nobody really knows what happened. Was it that these guys were incompetent? Or was it that this guy wanted to run things through his girlfriend's lab? I think it's a little from column A and a little from column B. I think that we're not going to learn what the truth is at all until there's a civil trial where somebody sues for wrongful termination. Because only just recently, in the middle of 2016, did they start doing DNA analysis at this lab again. Again, this is the premier $220 million crime lab in Washington, D.C., and they are not doing the DNA analysis they're supposed to, and they're not operating at the level they're supposed to. Their people are not qualified. They're not certified. That happens everywhere. From Omaha, Nebraska, to where one of my colleagues is working right now, or used to work, and successfully sued them for wrongful termination for her efforts to try to certify people in the crime lab, to D.C., to Michigan. Oh, let's talk about Michigan. I think I got this one. Michigan, right? Yeah, so how else do politics influence the crime scene? We're talking about objective evidence here, right? How is it possible to mess with objective scientific evidence? Well, in Michigan, they found a way. The prosecutors tell forensic scientists, when you are examining THC, which is the active part of cannabis, when you're examining that, don't mention what the source is in your report. Don't say where it comes from. Why? Because if you can assume the source is one particular thing, you can charge it as a felony. If you know what the source is and it's not that one thing, then it's just a misdemeanor. So by leaving out pertinent information, you can help them charge cannabis possession as a felony as opposed to a misdemeanor. That's a shitstorm. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to tell forensic scientists what they can and can't report in order to help you get better charges against somebody. So this is a statewide investigation into law enforcement corruption across the board. Not only the people who applied the pressure, but the people who did it. Okay? Hundreds of convictions are at jeopardy here. All right? And this is right now there's a class action lawsuit against the state of Michigan for this right now. It's going to cost millions.
But they're jeopardizing people's right to freedom.
Yes.
People's right to be heard.
Oh God.
Can they get away with it?
All the
In their whole
time.
future, I mean, a felony is a lot different than a misdemeanor.
Way different.
You ruined your whole life.
You've ruined. That's right. That's what they want is the felony charge so they can leverage you. So they can leverage you
Or
to say.
threaten you. We'll charge you with this unless you plead guilty.
Right. Exactly. So that way, if you plead guilty, the defense attorneys, they love pleas because they get paid. If you've got an appointed counsel, let's say it's the great state of Tennessee, you've got an appointed counsel. If it's a non-capital murder trial, anything short of murder, you only make $5,000 in the case, no matter what it is. That's what the appointed counsel makes. I will make more on a appointed case than the attorney does, and the attorney does 10 times more work. Isn't that interesting? It's a problem. It's terrible. So they are, but it's a tool, it's a mechanism. When you think like this, and you don't think in terms of the human cost, you don't think in terms of rights, you don't think in terms of the United States Constitution.
Or finding the real rapist. The real rapist is real out there raping somebody else.
You've just raised the most important point of all of this. Remember we talked about the DNA. The DNA in the semen of those two girls' underwear, it belongs to somebody. Wouldn't it be nice to know whose it was? No, because if we know who it was, it'll unseat our conviction. And if you're a prosecutor, you're driven by conviction rates and winning. And every prosecutor who's ever resigned has come out of that gauntlet and said the same thing. I can't believe what I did when I was in there. I can't believe how I was pressured. I can't believe the politics. I can't believe how I behaved. It wasn't me. I was driven by these things that weren't me, these elements that weren't me. And I regret every inch of it. Unless they're a psychopath, in which case they love it and don't recognize it anything wrong. Defense attorneys have the same problems, similar problems from the other side. Picking on prosecutors. Why am I picking on prosecutors? Because they control everything. Defense attorneys control nothing. Prosecutors control everything. So they're getting a little bit more of a kick in the teeth from me tonight than others because of that very reason. They have a greater duty of care, as you suggested. So this one just happened. This happened like 2 days ago. This is the director, the deputy director of the Denver Crime Lab. Do you think he's a scientist? No. He's a sergeant of police. Deputy director of the crime lab, high school educated. He resigned in face of wide-ranging internal investigation that found that he had committed numerous ethical and procedural violations, and now he's being criminally investigated. What did he do? He loved to sexually harass his underlings, that's one thing. And then he would say that, don't report it to HR, they're a waste of space. They can't do, I control them anyway. But that's not, we don't care much about that. That just gives you his character. What he liked to do is if somebody gave him the crime scene report, he would just change it. Change the words, change the certainty, change the findings, because he knew better than them. And he wouldn't tell them. He would submit the reports to the DA altered without telling the analyst what he'd done. And if the analyst found out and told him, he said, shut up, go along with it. I know more than you. I know exactly what to leave out so we can get the prosecution right. You put this in here, the defense is going to have a field day with it and see all this doubt. We don't need that. Just leave it out. They're never going to find out. That's what in the administrative investigation. That's not me conjecturing. That's what he said, and proudly. Okay.
How did he get the job in the first place?
He got assigned to it. Very often, the crime scene. What happens is somebody gets hired when they're young. They get hired as a police officer. Then they either cannot carry a gun for some reason, or they show an aptitude for the crime scene work. They like doing that. They want to be separate from other people, so that's what they wind up doing, and that's where they wind up working. Then they wind up being the person who gets put in charge of the crime lab eventually on behalf of the police that runs the lab. And they wind up being in charge of maybe some people with master's degrees or PhDs. Maybe. Very rarely that's going to happen. And then only at the very high state Department of Justice levels. At the lower levels, it's going to be people with a bachelor's degree. Or in Mississippi, the smartest one they had one time, when I was testifying there a couple years ago, it was a very nice young lady who got her degree online from the Union Institute in forensic science. And she knew nothing. And she was so easy to discredit, and it was so sad. So they get the job by attrition, by just being there and being a warm body to put there. And also, those spots are given to people who will go along to get along. They're political spots. My mentor, John Thornton, he likes to say, if you've ever got somebody who's got a rank in front of their name and they're in charge of a crime lab, that's a problem. Like a colonel this or a captain that, that's a problem. Because they're not a scientist. All right? And this is the last one. Recognize this one? We have a new crime lab here in the great state of Alaska. I was called about 2 years about it. They said, we got this new crime lab, and what do you think? And it's got all this great stuff, and it's so amazing, and it's $80 million, $90 million. They just opened it. What do you think? And I said, you can do more with a competent scientist and a folding card table than you can with $90 million of equipment and an idiot. Somebody who's not properly trained. Okay? So it's very dangerous unless you hire the right people. And of course, what did? They hired all these people who took the job at a very low rate of pay, and it's been causing problems ever since. Some of the problems include a rape kit backlog that's like 70% of all the rape kits have not been processed or examined. My favorite one is this. They have a backlog of cocaine that has not been tested and pot that hasn't been tested. So what do they do to combat this? Well, they hadn't really figured out all their auditing software yet, so the director of the crime lab gave his 13-year-old daughter a key card access to the lab and had her going on the weekends to catalog it. That's not a joke, that's what happened. 13-year-old daughter running around on the weekends, unsupervised, with his key card to audit the drugs, to count the drugs. Like it.
Or we could just make marijuana legal.
We could. Oh, stop saying that. You're hurting my brain.
What would be the expectations for a crime lab?
Oh, it depends on the statutes, depends on the legislation, but the expectation would be that they would be an unbiased filter to cool down any expectation of law enforcement. They should be there to act as a filter for the theories of law enforcement, or the hypotheses of law enforcement. So law enforcement has a place to go to test their hypotheses or test their theories before they make an arrest. The problem is criminal investigation is conducted precisely the opposite way. They find a suspect, they arrest them, and then they start investigating them to see if they committed a crime. That's how criminal investigation works. That's backwards. What? We like him for this. Let's box him in.
Make the evidence fit.
Or just collect. We don't make the evidence fit. Just collect the evidence that does fit, and don't collect the other stuff because we control all that. So if it doesn't exist for us, it doesn't exist for the defense. They'll have to go find it on their own, which is why you would hire defense investigators.
So that's our mission statement. Do they have a prolongation of expectations, is what I was trying to ask.
They do, but there's nobody accountable. What you're talking about is a level of accountability. Nobody, it's like saying who polices the police.
Yeah.
The prosecutor, if they're engaging in unethical conduct or criminal conduct, who polices them? It's supposed to be the FBI. They're the ones who are supposed to do public corruption cases. Sometimes they do an amazingly good job. I've seen the FBI do some really great investigations, put together some great public corruption cases. When they're motivated, when somebody pisses them off. If they're not motivated, I've seen them do nothing or terrible. It all comes down to people. You can't legislate or finance competence. You have to find it and reward it and nurture it. Somebody who's a competent professional. You can't make a competent professional. Somebody is either that by virtue of their character or they're not. That's what I've found. So this one right now, this is not some distant thing. This is just published this month.
But you weren't involved in this in any
No, they called me in to give a comment about it.
You're an expert in living here.
I have a policy. My policy is I do not work cases in Alaska unless it's as a favor or as it's an interest case. I try to avoid them because there's so much incompetence, so much corruption, and I know all the players. I know who everybody is and what they've done. It's not fair.
It's hard to live here, you mean?
Here's the thing. I know a lot of things about a lot of people in town. You know what I say? I'm not perfect. And I know tons of stuff. Doesn't mean anything because everybody makes mistakes. Everybody's stupid. You know, we all make mistakes. Life is full of second chances. You can't think that way. You can't think in terms of whatever, they're a felon, so you throw them away. Because that's how you create people who hate you and are not invested in society. If they're a particular kind of felon, then I might think that way. But you know what I mean? It's not like that. It's more like I know too much to put me under oath.
Well, no, I mean more like, get them the process is more important than the facility.
But they're not accountable to anybody. They're accountable to 0 people. So it wouldn't matter nothing that I would do would matter. All I can do is I can educate the public. I can talk to them. I can have workshops and seminars and I can talk about stuff and I can share my ideas and I can write textbooks and I believe this. This is why I write textbooks. I told Kim this a number of times. I write textbooks when I get angry. And I use those books to educate the next generation of students. And my students take that message forward. And I think that's the only place I ever make a difference. That's my belief. And that brings us right to, I think, the last slide here, which is solutions. Anybody recognize that handsome fella right there? Greg has been a great supporter of mine over the years, so I appreciate that, Greg. But when we were planning and plotting this seminar, we talked about the importance of all these things. And I said, we got to take a picture right in front of the sign that's over there. Stand up for your right to read. Think for yourself. What we need are educated and ethical professionals, clear protocols for them to follow, total public transparency, and an educated public. Because what we keep learning from the political process is that the more people speak up, the more politicians listen. As long as you have an informed public, as long as you have a free press, we can have these conversations and things can move. That's what I believe. So that's why I wrote the textbook that I wrote. It addresses some of those issues and some of those concerns and demonstrates the need for newer and better protocols and some of the solutions that I found. That's why I wrote it. You had a question back there.
When I was younger, I thought you made decisions logically.
Mm-hmm.
As I got older, I realized that I think we make all of our decisions emotionally.
Yes.
If that's the case, how can there be a just system?
Like I just said, this is, okay.
And even with all of this.
No. Let me suggest to you this. This is a really great question because it's worse than you think. Because it's worse than what you just said. I think what you're saying is true. We do make decisions emotionally, but it's worse than that. When the information we get affects an emotional belief that we have, then it changes the way we think about it, and we don't even know. That's a whole area of cognitive psychology that we need to be highly aware of. When you are hearing information that supports things that you believe, you trust it. You hold it to your breast. Even if it's not really very reliable and you know it comes from a bad source, you still hold on to it. when you hear stuff that disproves or tends to disprove the things that you believe at heart, you ignore it. You try to find fault. You try to find ways to pull it apart. Right? We change the way we think when the information that we get involves or affects our belief system. So that's the first thing. We have to recognize that's a problem. It's true for everybody in this room, including me. So that's why we have to have very clear protocols. They have to be public, and everybody has to follow them every single time to prevent that. So even if you are being emotional, there's a reason why if a case involves a certain thing, you got to recuse yourself. If a case involves a certain party, you can't be anywhere near it. If a case involves a certain piece of information, you have to treat it a certain way. If there's a certain type of evidence, it always has to be examined the same way to avoid these pitfalls that are associated with emotion. But that comes down to, in my belief, it comes down to having an educated public. Because unless the public knows about this, they can't apply pressure. The protocols have to be clear. They have to be public. The information about our public servants has to be made public all the time. And the professionals that we have to understand these protocols. And the public has to be willing to speak out. The public has to be willing to vote. They have to be willing to, when they serve on juries, make the tough calls. To hold our public servants accountable. That's the only way that I see it. If you think there's a better way, please tell me so. Because I would love to know. Sir?
How television shows affect the way juries respond to stuff that you say?
Okay, what you're talking about is referred to widely as the CSI effect, to an extent. Good TV shows, no, here's how it works. Images teach people faster and better than anything else. That's the problem. The image, that's why I showed you the image up at front. That picture of that perfect digital looking fingerprint with all the numbers and everything next to it looks very convincing and very compelling, and you're going to remember that. That's the problem. It creates a bias. It plays on what's called the availability heuristic. The more information, we tend to believe the thing we most easily access or remember. And TV and movies does that for us. It creates a very powerful image. And it combines it with not only powerful images of sex and violence, which are great, I love, by the way, just to be very clear, but also imagery that's associated with music. You know what I love? I love watching movies from the 70s, like no soundtrack. Like it's just the people walking around doing stuff. So whatever emotion is there, it's coming from you. But and I don't necessarily mind being manipulated when I'm watching a movie by music if it's good, but I know when it's happening. I'm very aware when it's happening. So it better be good. Because I'm so educated. I'm so smart.
That's where your jury pool comes from.
Yes, that's the problem. So it plays a big role, a very big role. Worse than that, professionals know this. I'll give you an example. There was a man, he's been working as a crime scene technician for about 15 years in London, UK. And he would always show up with all of his gear. He would always have his crime scene unit FBI jacket on, even though he wasn't with the FBI. And so everybody presumed he knew what he was doing, that he was competent, because they had this image, FBI crime scene unit, that was on his jacket. So he must have been competent and professional. Took 15 years to figure out he didn't have the degree he said he didn't have. He didn't know what he was doing, didn't know how to collect evidence, didn't know how to test evidence, and certainly didn't know how to reconstruct crime. 15 years. Why? FBI crime scene unit. That image is so powerful. It affects, it's not just movies and television. Marketing is based on this entire concept. When the FBI goes and processes a major case scene, you know what they do? Like Colorado Theater shooting or World Trade Center, anything like that, you know what they do immediately? They hand out jackets. Everybody on the scene is wearing an FBI crime scene unit jacket. Does that mean everybody that's there working for the FBI crime scene unit? Nope. Most of them are not. But they're all wearing the jacket. Let that sink in.
Well, I feel like there's a whole other level too. Sometimes it seems like it's not just about the education or the training, but it's these people that are getting put in these positions, whether they have the right connections
Right.
or whatever it might be, that it's a different level beyond the education and training, but more
Political.
corruption or more people using these positions for their gain in ways that are
Yes.
clearly unethical and right under people's noses.
Right, it used to be, right? It used to be right under our noses. Now it's just out in the open. The only difference between Mexico and the United States used to be that things in Mexico are done with a shoebox full of money and out in the right, everybody sees it and everybody expects it. In the United States, that's all hidden with favors and behind the scenes. Now we're not even hiding it anymore. We're just not even hiding it anymore. So the public corruption is so naked and so open. And I don't know why it is we're not responding to that. Because this article that ran in the Anchorage Area News, everybody knows about it, but we've become so inured at the idea of public corruption. We just expect it. It's like, oh, $80 million boondoggle? Yep, sounds about right. Turn the page. No, that's not what we are supposed to do. We're supposed to be, we are supposed to write letters. We are supposed to respond. We are supposed to talk amongst ourselves. And when we get to the voting booth, we are supposed to vote. But that means we have to show up to vote, right?
Yeah.
Whenever it's voting time, and I am doing something, and I remember, I try to go and do my absentee ballot, because I don't always remember on the day, and I can't always on the day, but I always vote, because I always want to make sure that I do it, because I know that I'll forget. And I know it's hard to vote, but that's the only place where this stuff matters. When you vote in a person, you're voting in their character, their integrity, and their agenda. And we are constantly voting in the wrong people, in my view. We're voting in politicians. As my father-in-law used to say, anybody who can get voted in is not somebody you want running the thing anyway, so that's the problem. But that's the problem with politics influencing forensic science. It shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be, we should be subject more to objective evidence. We should be more, embrace it more. But as long as we reason with our heart and with what we want to believe rather than what's actually going on, it's going to be a problem. So that's, again, why we wrote this textbook. It's to get to that newest and latest generation of investigators and forensic personnel who are going to be influenced by TV, who are going to be influenced by movies. So it's tough. I'm not pretending it's not. Go ahead.
Would any one of us ever be put on a jury? I mean, they would ask
Always.
some kind of question,
Yep.
know that they would, well, I don't want you, I'm not going to be able to manipulate you.
That's
Or
sure
you're
they
going to
will.
be in a jury room saying,
Yeah. It depends. I'll tell you right now, a lot of places they get very angry at lectures like this to even talk about jury pool. I can get accused of trying to tamper with juries or jury contamination. And there are places that make it actually illegal. States that it's illegal to try to educate a juror about law, policy and procedure, forensic evidence, anything like that. It's actually illegal to do that because they don't want people who are knowledgeable serving on juries. No. If you know anything, they don't want you.
But yet they'll let a prosecutor manipulate information or law enforcement manipulate it. Not all.
Not all,
But
no.
some.
Some.
And then they'll pick the jurors they want to try to get.
Yeah, it's very dissatisfying when you look at how the sausage is made. It's very frustrating. But that's the challenge. The challenge is to be a critical thinker, to not outsource your cognition, to make sure that you are making decisions for yourself. And when you accept a piece of, how many of you, let's just try this as an exercise. How many people in the room have ever forwarded an article without reading it, just reading the headlines? I've done it. I've totally done it. Why? Because it fit with what I wanted to believe. And then my wife immediately, within 5 minutes, went, that doesn't say, that's wrong, that's, and I'm like, oh shit, because she reads. That's why I married her. She's smarter than me.
Clickbait.
Clickbait, exactly. I have fallen for clickbait many a time. I have. I know that I have. But I married somebody who's not going to let me get away with that. All right? So that's part of the secret. But the reality is we do that. So we have to be better than that. And I'm making it my personal mission this year to not be clickbaited. How am I doing? She's like, better, maybe? I acknowledge the problem. The first step is admitting I have a problem. Okay? So let's not be clickbaited this year. Anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time. If somebody wants to stay and talk and ask questions, please do. Thank you so much to the Sitka Public Library for hosting this, and thank you so much, all of you, for coming out in the cold and in the flurries. I have a piece of chocolate for everybody in this room. All right? Thank you so much. If you want to keep talking, we will.